Hey folks, Ron here. Today I'm going to be doing the home of, in fact, this is it right here. The home where Brian Wilson wrote the Smile album, where he lived up here on Laurel Way. He and his wife Marilyn bought it in 1965, the height of the Beach Boys' success. And we're going to talk about Brian in a minute. What I also want to show you, can you see the view of the city? No, I can't expand my picture, but let's walk a little bit. It's an unbelievable view looking down on the city from the top of the hill here. Let's see if I can show you. And we've got some sunlight, so it's not easy to see, but boy, this is really something. We're looking down on, I think that's Century City there. I've got to figure it out. God, I should know this. I think it's Century City. It's not downtown. Might be also the Wilshire Corridor and Beverly Hills. Anyway, so boy, this is certainly a favorite of mine. Brian Wilson, who I have met a couple of times. Brian Wilson, who essentially with his two brothers, Dennis and Carl, his cousin Mike, and friend of Carl's, well, let's say Al Jardine. Al Jardine was in and then out of the band and then back in again after going to dental school. That was made up the main crux of the Beach Boys. And also Bruce Johnston joined in '75, and he's been mostly with the band ever since. But what I was going to say was, yeah, so Brian Wilson, we all know, the genius, the Mozart of Hawthorne. And like I said, I've met Brian a couple of times, and, you know, true to form, I mean, God love him, he's on, you know, he's on a lot of medication because he does have auditory and visual hallucinations sometimes. Hopefully keeps him in check more time. I mean, considering he has to take medication so he doesn't hear voices in his head and hallucinate, he's doing pretty well. Because I've seen him 2, 3, 4 times and spoken to him a couple of times, but it's just like it was in the 60s. He's difficult to speak to. He's very shy. And he said that sometimes he doesn't know whether the voices are in his head or someone's talking to him. But Brian certainly is a legend, and he is a genius. He truly is a musical genius. He lives up to that title, and he has influenced so many, including Paul McCartney, so many people, so many musicians over the world. And his great masterpieces were 2 records in a row: Pet Sounds and Smile. I got the dog with me. I'm tripping out on these hills here. And, you know, Pet Sounds was a departure. Pet Sounds was in 1966 was Brian's reaction to Rubber Soul from the Beatles. And he and Paul kind of had a friendly competition going for a number of years. But Pet Sounds was the first album where Brian wanted to depart from the formula songs of beach and romance. And, well, there were romance, but they were sad songs. And Cars and so on. So it was a very mature album, and Brian actually hired a guy named Tony Asher, who took a leave of absence from his advertising agency so he could help Brian write the songs. And basically Tony wrote the lyrics based on the ideas that Brian had, and Brian wrote the music on his piano, which he continued with, you know, all the records, including what we're going to talk about, Smile, the ill-fated Smile. So Pet Sounds was kind of indicative of the melancholy, the sadness in Brian's life, and longing for girls from his past, even though he was married to Marilyn. One might have been Caroline. Caroline No was one of the songs. And Carol Mountain was a girl that Brian knew from high school. It might have been influenced by her. And he just kind of told these feelings to Tony Asher, and Tony wrote them down and wrote them into songs. And like I said, Brian wrote the music. Well, Pet Sounds was not the triumph that Brian hoped for. I mean, it made number 10. It went to number 10 in the Billboard Top 200, which was kind of a letdown. He was hoping it would be a number 1 or 2 album, of course. But he was certainly praised in the music community and continues to this day. It's one of the greatest albums of all time. And boy, did it influence Sgt. Pepper and Smile, or at least the acetate for Smile, really influenced Sgt. Pepper. So after Pet Sounds, Brian, getting more and more into drugs, which was probably to help mask the mental illness he was starting to feel, he started writing bits of music that he called a Teenage Symphony to God, Pocket Symphony to God also. And while the guys were away on tour, the Beach Boys, uh, with Glenn Campbell doing Brian's parts, and then later Bruce Johnston, I think that's really when Brian was at his most creative, because he was happy to stay home, literally stay home. Come on, come on. And write. Come on. My dog, hey, you don't live there. Boy, my dog is really trying to get into this person's yard. Let's see if we can see the view here again. I'm going to walk up to it in a minute. Oh, there's downtown, so that's Century City, we're saying. Probably can't see it over the hedge, but that's downtown LA that way, which is quite a ways away. Where was I? I was talking about the creation of the Smile album. So snippets of stuff. Brian was using, a lot of LSD, a lot of speed, a lot of other things, and those were influencing the kind of music. And like I said, just snippets of music. Now, some of the songs were made in full form, or released on the next album, which became sort of an answer to the fact that Smile never came out at that point. Cabin Essence, the wonderful and majestic Surf's Up, Wind Chimes, other songs. Now, for Smile, Brian got together with his friend, composer, writer Van Dyke Parks. Van Dyke wanted, and Brian, but probably mostly Van Dyke, wanted to write an album that was kind of loosely a concept album about the United States, from East Coast to West Coast, a journey. And essentially that's what Van Dyke did, using Brian's music and Brian's ideas along with him. So let's go this way, see what we got. So the album was kind of done in fits and starts, and Brian, it was getting harder to work with Brian. Hey, you want to go this way? Which way you want to go? Why do I let the dog make the decision? I don't know. He walks me, I don't walk him. Anyway, so I gotta switch hands. So really, like I said, the album was sort of done in fits and starts. And when the guys came back from tour, I think they were touring Europe at the time, and Brian said, I've got this mind-blowing album. And actually what he worked on first was Good Vibrations. And that took like 6 months to do. And he said it would be a #1 hit, and Good Vibrations did turn out to be a #1 hit. But even with Good Vibrations, Mike Love, singer from the Beach Boys, Mike and Brian and Carl and Dennis's cousin, he didn't like the lyrics. He didn't like the drug influences, because Mike was very anti-drug, very into transcendental meditation, still is. Very did not like the spacey drug influenced lyrics, and famously said, don't fuck with the formula. And that was Mike's line about Pet Sounds. You're screwing it up for us. About Smile. Wasn't all that crazy about the sad, melancholy, depressing, what he called depressing Pet Sounds either. So Mike changed some of the lyrics of Good Vibrations to the I'm picking up Good Vibrations part, which he sings to in the song. Anyway, he wanted to make them more lyrical and more pleasant than the kind of, like I say, the drug influenced, kind of weird, spacey, negative lyrics that Van Dyke had come up with, Van Dyke Parks. So then Brian proceeded to show the rest of the songs to the band, and they were not happy. Well, the brothers, Carl and Dennis, were always supportive of Brian, loved, and really, I think Dennis had like a hero worship going on for his big brother, Brian. But let's see if we can look through. My dog is looking at the view. Can you guys see it? We're looking through a fence now, but all of the downtown LA, all of the west side, if it was clear, we'd be able to see the ocean. Somebody's clearing out this lot, looks like to build on, but they just knocked something down. What a view they have, especially at night, huh? Okay, so the guys were really unhappy with the songs. Well, I should say, again, I amend that to say Mike was really unhappy. And he said, especially with Heroes and Villains and Cabin Essence to Van Dyke Parks, Mike would question, what does this mean? And at one point, Van Dyke said, I don't know, whatever your interpretation is. And that wasn't the kind of thing that Mike wanted to hear. So that really got to Brian, the fact that Mike didn't like it. That was just one thing. They went to Gold Star Studios in Hollywood to record. One of the songs was just called Fire. They had a group of songs that Brian and Van Dyke were just calling the elements, fire, water, earth. And when they were doing the fire music, which was just instrumental, and the sound of flames, Brian made everybody dress in fireman hats. And there's pictures of Brian starting to get heavy already, with his shirt off, just wearing the fireman hat in the studio. And they had sirens going, and they had woo-woo noisemakers. It's supposed to sound like kind of the end of the world. And when they had the fire music, when they were recording that fire music, across the street there was a fire. And I don't know what the establishment was, restaurant, store, offices, but it only added greatly to Brian's paranoia, and he decided, that's it, we're shutting down, he's not recording Fire. And this went on, and time and time again this went on. There was more stalling involved with the recording of the album, and Brian was more and more unsure, doing more and more drugs, less and less sure of himself. Somebody just roared up in a Porsche. That's Beverly Hills, ain't it, folks? And eventually, he decided that it just wasn't going to happen. But before that, summer was starting to come around. It was already the beginning of 1967. Then it's the spring of 1967. Then it's the summer of 67. Boy, am I having a bad hair day. Then Brian heard, I think, the acetate for Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and he said, that's it. We missed it. He said Sgt. Pepper was the greatest album of all time, and they had blown it. He felt that Paul, particularly in the Beatles, had beat Brian to the punch, that the world now had Sgt. Pepper, and he wanted to be the first one with that kind of concept album, revolutionary concept album, and he wasn't, because now Sgt. Pepper beat him out. And that's really when Brian abandoned Smile. And yes, this is the time when he had the sandbox under his feet at the piano, so it could feel like he was at the beach when he was writing, and he had the tent in the living room when everybody would meet in the tent and smoke hash, but there was no air, so it wasn't easy to breathe in there. Brian was starting to hold meetings in the swimming pool because he was afraid that his father, Murray, who had been the manager of the group in the beginning, was bugging him. They had fired Murray back in 1965. They had to fire their own father, the guys, and Mike's cousin. So Brian's paranoia was increasing. His mental illness was starting to really come on. His drug use was huge. And then he abandoned Smile. And that was the beginning of a very bad period for Brian that lasted a long, long time, culminating with about 2 years where he spent in bed in the 70s. He was escaping. He was up to 300 pounds. He was bumming smokes from strangers on the street and rides. And Brian went through a really bad time. And of course, those 2 disastrous sessions with Eugene Landy, his 24-hour-a-day therapist, who eventually lost his license. Landy's actually deceased now. He moved to Hawaii afterwards, after he lost his license. I don't quite know what happened then. But eventually Brian got it together. He and Marilyn unfortunately divorced. I've met Marilyn as well. Nice lady. She's a real estate agent in Los Angeles now. And Brian is happily married to his second wife now, and he has daughters Carney and Wendy, and some daughters with his second wife, some children with his second wife. And it's a whole different day. Thank God. And so let's get back now to 1967. Brian shells Smile indefinitely. And then he starts touring around the time of the millennial and starts recording with a group called the Wondermints. And, eventually he was convinced, I think, by the Wondermints to let's perform Smile live. And it was a really big deal to Brian. And in 2004, they took it on the road, and I saw it live. Actually, I saw it the election eve, so whatever November, or the presidential election 2004, I saw it. I remember we were all in the foyer before the concert started, inside the concert hall, and Danny DeVito and Rhea Perlman were next to me. We were all watching the election results on the TV monitors before we went in to see Brian in the concert. It was an amazing, historic opportunity to hear Smile live. I'm so glad he did it. The record came out. It was top 10, which was unbelievable. It's a whole new generation who didn't even know anything about Brian the Beach Boys. Come on, you can't go in that house. Were exposed to it. And the wonderful music came out. One Wonderful. That's another song. One Wonderful. Wonderful, another song from Pet Sounds. So, like I said, after the aborted Pet Sounds, the Beach Boys put out a record called Smiley Smile in 1967 with some remnants of the Smile album, but it didn't catch, and it wasn't Smile. And it was the beginning of a very dry period in the Beach Boys. Well, I shouldn't say. I mean, you know, I think 1974 they had a #1 greatest hits album. So, oh, look at the view. Can we see through the gate there? Through their living room. I don't know if you can see, but through their living, you can't see it here. They can see all of downtown LA and the whole view. That's living, folks, huh? So I'm glad that Brian eventually put out the Smile album and performed the Smile album. And in a minute, I'm going to take you by the house again, and we'll take one last look at the home here on Laurel Way. And then after this, Brian moved to Bellagio, Bel Air, and he was there for a number of years. In fact, he might even still be there. No, I know where he is actually. He's in a gated community off Mulholland, that's right. But he was at Bellagio for a number of years too. Okay, folks, we'll be back with you in a minute when we're back in front of the house. Okay, folks, so are we on? Yeah, so I'm out of breath because this is a humongous hill. Now, I mean, I walk a hill every day, I run a hill every day of my life, but it's a sprint. This is a long way. So, last look, home where history was made, where Brian Wilson wrote with Van Dyke Parks the Smile record, 1966. Okay, folks, my name is Ron. There's the house behind me. If you like my channel, please subscribe. And by the way, if you do subscribe, see the hill, see the city behind me? If you do subscribe, please leave comments in the comment section if you see fit. If you do subscribe, please hit the little bell icon next to the subscribe button, and then you'll get indications as to when I post. And give me likes. I would appreciate it, and YouTube loves it for their algorithm. Okay, folks, see you at the next location. Appreciate you watching and listening. Again, my name is Ron, and we'll see you again. Bye.